Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Leaf Collectivo. With me today, Tim from the Bottle Club. Welcome, Tim. Great to see
How's it
you.
going?
Yeah, thanks for joining us. It's a bit. The last time we saw each other, we were doing an event in London, and we were talking about profitability in marketplaces, and especially multi-brand marketplaces. And here we are today. So, for those that don't, know the Bottle Club, which probably a lot of people will know. You want to give us a brief introduction, and it would be great also to know as part of this introduction your journey, because you're a slightly different type of like head of eco manager, right? Like you're in your previous life, you were a graphic designer, and here you are. When we're going to be talking a lot about numbers, we're going to be talking a lot about P&Ls and things, and not the type of topics that a graphic designer would be would be talking about. So yeah, Tim, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. So yeah, Bottle Club's been around for about just over 7 years now. It was previously a business called Wine Mill, but it's a online multi-brand retailer that sells beers, wines, and spirits, but basically anything alcohol. It's in its inception was very much like a premium drinks retailer, and was very kind of connoisseur level. Like very prestige, very premium products. And when I joined the business, one of the things that I said to the team was that actually this was already existed in different capacities. So, Masters and Malt Whisky Exchange existed in that space already. What wasn't there was a lifestyle business that sold alcohol. That I always just joke about it being the ASOS of alcohol was kind of the goal of our business. So when as you previously mentioned, I came in as the designer of the business at the time. And in doing so, we rebranded and we just rebuilt this ethos from the ground up about making alcohol approachable, making sure that we were talking, telling the stories that other people otherwise wouldn't have talked about. Women in the industry, LGBT, black-owned businesses, all of these things that are really important to our consumers, but there isn't really a voice. And it's a bit of a melting pot sometimes that you're around. I go to a lot of tastings and events, and we get to hear about it. But we're not necessarily the customer, we're the seller, right? We're the retailer. So I wanted to make sure that we had a voice, those businesses and those people had a voice in the industry, and we wanted to be the people that told it. So very proud of what Bottle Club stands for now and the brand that we've built. So, and yeah, it's just been growing tremendously since then. Like obviously COVID was a huge win for us, and alcohol and e-commerce were the two booming parts of 2020 and 2021. So yeah, we really capitalised on that period of time. Yeah, it's been a really good journey.
It has been a great journey, and one I would say, because I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they were talking about how profitability now is kind of like at the center of most conversations, and growth, quote unquote, somehow is taking like a back seat from that point of view. But you could argue that like profitability should be at the forefront right from the beginning, and then kind of like you approach it in slightly different ways. Now, obviously, not all businesses that boomed during the pandemic were able to retain that that same velocity or growth, or some plateaus, some actually went down. But I think in your case, you actually were able to to capitalize on that, be able to take it to that extra level, and we'll even to a point where now you're the luxury of taking some very interesting decisions. Then we're going to be talking about that today, about what you can do, right? I mean, having a business that is profitable, that is that is growing, that is nurturing, that has already a following community, but also it's about the different kind of people that you serve, right? Because and I'm sure the type of people that you would have served during the pandemic would have probably shifted slightly afterwards, but now you kind of like have all this vision. Before we go into that, at what point do you want from becoming the designer to the head of ecom? Like, because I'm sure like that pitch and that rebranding, that redesign, I actually kind of stuck and wondering, before we go into business and that.
It came out of that in my design career, I was also like head of procurement and sourcing stuff. So I used to be a print designer, so I used to source the materials for magazines and POS fixtures for shop fittings. So I used to be in physical retail as well. So I had a pretty good understanding of how to purchase, but not necessarily a P&L, but how to understand the numbers that you're spending and justify cost, etc. So. And I also used to be responsible for things like carrier bags in 250 fashion retail store that I used to work for. So I had a good understanding of how to to work with numbers and work with justify costs and stuff. So, but I had no ecom experience at all. So as we rebranded and the team changed and we restarted Bottle Club as what it is now, I was trusted by the owners of the business to head up this channel, which I'm incredibly grateful for the team for enabling me to be here. And then as it grew, we already had strong relationships as a group, and then we built those relationships into what Bottle Club stood for. And then we learned, and we worked with a few different agencies that kind of educated us, put us in touch with the right people. We've learned as we've gone through, and I mean it's a story of learning. Like, we didn't know what we were doing when we, to be completely frank, when we started that business. And as we were going to COVID, we were still in that really young growth period. And that's when we learned our lessons. We made mistakes. I've got so many funny stories of that period of time where, we've just made silly mistakes because we didn't know that would be a problem in the future. And you start growing your customer service team, and you have different ways of approaching things. So, and as you move forward and you employ agencies to do your customer service, and you try and educate them with your process, and you go, I didn't even realise we didn't have a process. So I think it was just a journey.
You look at very natural until you need to train somebody else on doing that stuff, and then you realize,
it's also taking the emotion out of a lot of things. I think when you're in growth, you're like, it's very much your baby, and you're like, wow, I really want to retain the customers. This is our process, blah blah blah. But I think as you grow, you learn, and that's how we got here.
All right, yeah, that's interesting. Right, let's go into profitability in a multi-brand business.
Yes,
tough,
very tough.
Tiny margins,
growth hard, because realistically, what are you marketing? You market in a brand, you market in the products, and I always joke, if we were to put a billboard on the A13 of Johnny Walker, all we're going to do is drive sales to Tesco or to Sainsbury's, because it's the product that's in front of mind. So running a multi-brand retail from an acquisition perspective is just tough anyway. I mean, the majority of our acquisition historically has always been through shopping, because people knew the intent of the product that they wanted, and they just need to make sure they were getting the best price, best delivery, best reviews kind of thing, which we've got. But there isn't an affinity to you, it's an affinity to the product. And I think if you can maximise and understand that, that's super key. There is obviously room for brand marketing as well, but it's just a lot tougher. I think JD is a great comparative example of how you market a multi-brand retailer, is that they don't talk about products. Like, all of their billboards, all of their store displays, all of their creative is all about aspiration, the lifestyle, what is sports fashion, what is the lifestyle that is personified by a JD Sports customer. And I think that is how I look at Bottle Club, is that how do we represent ourselves as a lifestyle business rather than the products. But it's really tough, and people know alcohol really well. They're not necessarily looking for new products all the time, so it's always been tough for us to kind of brand market. And multi-brands is hard, especially when you're operating on tiny margins, as you say.
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, you guys are bootstrapped, right? So there were not big buckets of money being pushed, focused on just growth, from the get-go, right? I mean, and so that means that being profitable and understanding of the unit economics, right from the beginning, should have been a point to be able to grow that.
So it's part of an Indian family-run business, right? So they are inherently good at operating on small margins. That's the business. We're a cash and carry wholesale based business at group level, but their relationships, their buying power, and it's all, as I say, all family owned, family money or bootstrap. So, but how they operate is what I've learned from them of how we operate a business with those margins. And as I say, wholesale and cash and carry margins are smaller than ours, but they haven't got to deal with the same level of acquisition and cost of technology that we do.
How do you measure, your ROAS, your return on investment? How do you look at, because especially working on tiny margins, I'm sure you're going to have to dissect those numbers very, very much, right? I mean, being able to understand what's possible to invest, what's the return of that? How do you maximize that? I'm sure different product lines will have different margin, margin percentages. So how do you optimize stores? What are you optimizing towards? But then also, as I'm sure as you guys went to market, understanding the different shopping behaviors and the different, the different type of customers that you have in place.
Yeah.
Was that something that came later? Is that something that you guys learned as you went? When you started with a kind of like a bit of a hypothesis of what you were going to go
Yeah,
after?
I think everything. A lot of the data on how we operate now came later. It was through learnings and really starting to understanding our numbers. So originally we were like most e-commerce businesses, just operating on a flat ROAS percentage and just going, okay, let's do a 10 ROAS. That's what we want to go for. It's 10% cost of sale. That's what we can afford within the margins that we've got to operate, and everything else needs to fit within the remainder. But as we went through over time, you just start to realise that 10 ROAS isn't 10 ROAS. It's all on the attribution model. It's all going to be based on what that platform wants to present. And to be fair to Google normally underrepresents itself rather than overrepresents itself, but Facebook, then in our opinion, overrepresents itself. But yeah, so we were always operating on the 10, and then we started getting into really understanding our P&L, breaking it down by literally last year we were operating on a daily P&L, so we could see the cost of the warehouse per day, the cost of the units out per day. Like, we had this crazy understanding, probably too much, but it helped us learn what we needed to know for this year, which has been a really positive year for us, but so far at least. But yeah, so when you start getting into your P&L, if you start looking at what you actually spent of total cost of ads versus your profit, your final net profit at the end of the month, that's when you start going, was it 10 ROAS? Or was that a considerable percentage of all of my total profit was spent on acquisition? Where's that comparison? We spoke earlier about when agencies come into businesses, and also the people that operate businesses. If the person that's making the decisions on the agency or the ad spend or the creative that they're doing don't have an understanding of their P&L, and neither do the agency, how can you benchmark performance other than whichever attribution model you want to go down? Do you go down last click? Are you going down the MMM route? There's so many different ways to skin a cat, but if you don't know those numbers, it could be anything. And I think that's what we've been in a unique position to test what that looks like without the advertising.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because we were talking about this. Something that we do is every time we're kind of like evaluating, whether we onboard a brand or we get onboarded, it's understanding the unit economics. And it's something that we do before we say yes to any business, right? Because we want to make sure that, we have, clear and realistic aligned expectations of what's possible. Everybody wants the next ROAS, without even understanding whether the business actually can afford the 10x ROAS. From an operational point of view, and a lot of different things, right? Like, there is so many things when you go into like CM1, CM2, CM3. Most people don't even know their numbers, right? I mean, and despite the fact that they should, right? I mean, for some people, not all, like P&L is something that you get, like it's a retrospective tool rather than, something that you're actually looking at, on a day-to-day basis. But really understanding the unit economics so that not only what's realistic, but really what you're trying to optimize for. What are you trying to impact on? You're not able to optimize for everything, otherwise you're probably not optimizing for anything specific, right? And it's like, but understanding those different pieces and understanding the unit economics. We were talking in the previous episode with Thomas. Thomas was the first customer of ours who requested a P&L to be added to Leaf Answers, and he wanted them and us to be kind of like singing out of the same hymn sheet. That level of matureness, it's hard to come by, but it's almost like what you expect to have. It's the type of level of matureness that you want to be everybody, and to be transparent, right? And oftentimes, I was talking to your brand recently, just because the numbers might not look great, at least from what your expectations of great are, doesn't mean that they're not the numbers, right? It's like if you hide the reality still remains there, and the sooner you're actually confront the reality, then the sooner that you're able to actually action and do something about it. And yesterday we were talking about how a lot of people are looking for silver bullets, but what they don't realize is that you're not against the werewolf, like you're actually against, probably a handful of different monsters in front of you, and they're all change and they all morph. But it's actually understanding and being sure about the system that you build forward. And obviously it takes time, and you guys are in a position where you've been through a lot of stages, but now you're in a position where you actually understand, those P&Ls that you actually share and you actually are able to see it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And looking at, what drives the needle. And a lot of people also, and especially CFOs, and this comes from mostly from finance departments, like everybody wants to attribute every dollar or every pound to one single channel, right? One single thing. We're past that, right? And we'll probably never go back to that, to those type of times. But it's about understanding the system. It's about understanding the ecosystem that you play with, and then being able to make decisions about that. How do you guys have been through that journey?
I think we have multiple channels. Everyone has multiple channels, and I think there's a good few platforms out there that do a good job of at least mapping all of the stages of a journey. They're not necessarily good at attributing the performance of the journey, but showing how many steps there are to actual purchase, what that customer actually does. Customers are complicated. You don't realise the things that you do when you're actually buying something. You probably go on that website 3 or 4 times without really realising that you've been there, because you're kind of researching, especially as you get into those higher end products. They're not just, impulsive decisions, especially online. I think in store is a different story, which is why 75% of people still buy in store over online, right? But when you're online, you do have multiple steps. And I think Awin, who we use for our affiliates, has a really good purchase started and purchases and completed, and seeing which is the attribute of both of those sides of the journey. Triple Whale again has another, like a list of each of the orders that you've got, all of the touch points within it. Again, not the attribution, not necessarily completely accurate to each channel, but it's helps you understand that one channel that you want to attribute the performance to had a weight in that journey, but was not necessarily the contributing factor. So what we've done this year is we've tested what it looks like to not do any advertising, or any PPC or PPI advertising, but we still do CPA advertising. So the reason we did that is because without actually knowing, and I don't recommend everybody this, we're in a unique position to do this, but without actually knowing what that does when it's not there, it's the same with PR, right? If you don't know if you can't quantify it without seeing it, you need to see what it looks like without it. And we saw it does have a massive impact, but it doesn't have as bigger impact as the attribution would suggest. So if you say 60% of our sales come from this channel, you turn it off, and your sales don't go down by 60%, then that 60% was incorrect. And then that 60% was also incorrect when you compare it to the ROAS and the cost of it, because you're starting to over-attribute it to this is what it did, but it didn't, because it was only contributing 20%, but it was costing 60%. So again, as we talked about, it's about understanding those numbers and breaking them down and justifying them and understanding your customer's journey. So something we've done that we're incredibly proud of at the moment is in checkout. Shopify recently, in editions 2023 or 2024, bought a Shopify app called Checkout Blocks. And Checkout Blocks enables you to add customization to your checkout for all Shopify Plus merchants. So there's loads of products on the market for post-purchase surveys, but they've got a 20% completion rate. Once you've done your checkout, you don't do anything else. It's already coming. What we do is we ask one mandatory question in checkout, which has a 100% completion rate, and every single unit sold in that order, every single order that we now have has that data. And that data is then pushed into Klaviyo for segmentation. But the question that we're asking is, what was the reason for your purchase? So were you buying for yourself as a gift, hosting, or trade another? Which sounds really, basic. But what that does is you start to realise that 50% of our sales are gifts, right? So the repeat purchase rate of that gifting customer is completely different. How the customers, what they bought and what they're interested in are two different things. How you market to them is completely different. So when you start looking at the data divided by those segments and start understanding customer behaviour, then the things that you're seeing within Triple Whale or our Awin dashboard, for example, make a lot more sense in terms of the parts of the journey, where they came from, what they were looking for, what the keywords were, etc. So it's a really interesting topic. But yeah.
And it's interesting, right? Because as we were talking earlier, right? I mean, you guys have spent 7 years fatting the cow, and you're now, and now you're in a position where you can say, you know what, we're going to put the cow on diet to a point, and then we're going to see what is possible, right? I mean, and we're going to evaluate where things, come into place, which is the experiment that you guys did by shutting down, paid ads. But what people, often forget is that there is so much value in nurturing and increasing that lifetime value, like actually making sure that you nurture and continue and nurture the relationship and continue having that relationship over time. And I think, to your point, understanding the type of customer that you have and, the segmentation that you do of that, and then how do you speak to them? How do you actually try to bring them back? The best type of marketing is that one where you acquire once and then rinse multiple times.
Yeah.
And people forget about that, right? Like that combination or between acquiring a customer and retaining that customer and actually putting. If I think that if brands, and this is something that we see a lot, with especially early stage brands that are focused a lot on that, like top line ROAS. When they forget that actually that's only part of the piece of the puzzle, and the one piece that the brand should own is that piece of retention, or at least have the right type of partners that will help you with that piece of retention, bringing those customers back into the journey, building that into your model, and understanding really what's your lifetime value. Something again, right? If most brands that you will ask, do you know your lifetime value? More often than not, they might have an idea, but getting to a point where you can say, well, actually, in your case, our customer base is made of these segments, and the lifetime value of each of the segments is slightly different. But you want to nurture and maximize the potential return out of each one of them.
For sure, and the lifetime value. Your calculation for lifetime value is also different because you're looking at a longer period. Because if you're only doing one purchase within 30 versus one in 365, it's completely different. So yeah, it's super important to know the difference between those.
Where is the attention for you guys right now? Like, obviously, you're in a very luxurious position to be in as a business owner, and this is something that. We also speak a lot with our brand partners. You're always constantly optimizing for one thing. What is the Bottle Club optimizing for right now?
I think for retention and making the most of the customers that we got, as you previously said, is like we've spent, and so does so many businesses, spending so much money on trying to get new customers and just letting the ones that you've already got just fall away. And like with me and George from One Pilot talk about it quite a lot, that obviously one of the easiest ways that you can nurture a customer is just good customer service, just making sure that you're attentive, available, and talking correctly with the customers and available on their timings, making sure that me and George talked about it a lot when we were working with One Pilot, that why do businesses dictate when their customers can talk to them, right? Like if your business operating hours are like 8 till 5, but your customers, majority of the time your customers buying something is like 5 till 10 p.m, why is there nobody in that business around at that time? So having that scalable solution for answering phone lines and messages when your customer is ready is key. And then Klaviyo has obviously just launched Klaviyo CRM, B2C CRM, right? Or he's launching. And in the launch of that, AB from Klaviyo, the owner of Klaviyo, made a really good comparison about e-commerce versus in-store. And he was building an ice rink in his garden, was the example that he was using. And he goes to the hardware store and he speaks to this guy in the hardware store, and he's recommending galvanized nails and all the stuff that you're going to need. And every time he goes in, that guy knows what his project is. And they bond over it. They become friends, and I think you do have that in your life. Everybody's got that in their life in some capacity. There's one store, there's barbers or whatever, where you have that relationship with the person that you go to, and it's almost weird when they're not there. We're all of us are doing e-commerce. We're in this industry, but we're not taking the same logic and applying it to that customer relationship, because the worst part is we've got more data than anybody else. Like that store owner is just remembering the relationship that he has with that person, but we have what they purchase, where they live, what they're doing, what their age is. Like we have that data to give them the better experience in it and leveraging that. So the reason I mention it is because that's what we're trying to focus on, is to gather as much appropriate data from the order, from the customer, so that our communication with them is more appropriate. we've always done a big job on site of making sure that all of our products have so much data on them that you can discover them regardless of your level of knowledge. If you're buying for your granddad who likes whiskey, but you know nothing about whiskey, you can get there with filters, sub-collections, etc. If you're a whiskey nerd like I am, and you want to get down to your aged single malts and Highlands that are in a port cask, we have that level of data sitting on the product. You can filter by the lid, the material, like all of these different things, regions, and etc. And that's on every single one of our products, because we want to make sure that we're gathering all enabling the customers to get there. But then what that enables is, on those sales, we can really segment down to when you're getting into gifting again. If that person is a gifting customer and they've bought that whiskey for their granddad, we can then remarket them to them in 11 months' time and say, oh, last year you bought this bottle of famous grouse. Hopefully that your recipient enjoyed it. Have you seen our other range or this other thing? So you're not sending the same gift again, and you can even start educating them. And that's what we want to do, is we want to nurture the customers that we've got, gain as much data on those customers so that we can build that relationship with them and have the understanding of their reason for purchase, what they're purchasing, what they're interested in. And also if we can then turn all those gifting customers into self-consuming customers, right? Because then we'll find out what they like and even maybe reward them as a referral, or reward them for them being a good gifter and give them something in return. Do you know what I mean? So there's loads, and I think another avenue that we're trying to explore at the moment, it's not something that we've done previously, but again, is referral, because the cost of acquisition is so high, but actually the word of mouth advertising that you're going to get from this company is amazing, they've got such a good range, the service is great, blah blah blah. If you give each of them a fiver and they spend £100, you spent £10, but you've got 3 orders, so you've got £300 in theory, right? So there's loads of avenues that you can still acquire new customers and still grow sales, but by nurturing rather than by.
Yeah, and it is very interesting that, I mean, there is this concept of unreasonable hospitality. And it was written by this guy called William something. I forgot his last name. I need to remember, because I always use this analogy. But he got his restaurant to become the #1 restaurant in the world within 18 months or something like that. And he was saying that the thing with fine dining and food in general, right, is that great food is now democratized. Right, you can almost say there is a saturation of great food, because nowadays anybody can become a cook, and great food exists. Where the difference then becomes for restaurants is not really in the great food that they can serve, but in the experience that they build around it, right? And that's where restaurants start to differentiate themselves into creating those unreasonable experience, right? And that's what, a term that he coined, and, something that he built into the experience in his restaurant, is how do we can create those unreasonable experiences? And then, that was a system that they created, right? And turning that experience of their, of their patrons, in something that they will remember, right? And that they will talk about. And I think that, to your point, coming back to, online retail, how do you start building that? Because, I mean, in your case, right, you could argue that, what you sell is commodity, right? I mean, the same, quote unquote, right, the same range of products that I can buy from you guys, I can buy it elsewhere, right? And you were saying that, a lot of people, who actually find you guys find you through shopping ads, right? And they go search for a whiskey, one of your ads they come in, they explore the range, they see something that they like, they go and check out, right? But you want that experience to be great, like you were saying, right? It's going that extra mile, on doing the unreasonable part, right? Yeah. How do we make sure that our catalog is the best catalog out there, in our category, right? So that in that experience, that information is actually accessible to create that experience. Because the next time somebody is going to look for it, right? And how do you build that experience, right? That going the extra mile, doing the unreasonable. And these are intangibles to a certain extent, because, it takes time, it's costly, right? I mean, it's something that, for you to actually nurture, like this sort of catalog, especially when a lot of people are just going on the, fast type of thing, doing the minimum necessary to gain. It's the 80-20%, right? I mean, a lot of people do the 20% that get you 80% of the results, but very little do that 80% that gets you that extra 20%. But that 20% makes such a difference into building that relationship, like you said, into creating that long-term relationship and being able to. Ultimately, yesterday somebody was saying that the way they operate, and this is like a 25-year-old brand, and she was saying that she now is managing for legacy rather than for the immediacy, right? So she's now looking into the long term, right? And how does the brand, will exist over the next 25 years, right? Like what would it stand for, right? Over the next 25 years. And I feel like a lot of people are in that immediacy, like ROAS is immediate, right? It's something that you can quantify immediately, right? And it's not saying that it's not right. I mean, obviously you need to measure the different points, make sure that, they're actually, like things stack up. And like you said, make the data as accurate and as realistic as possible, which means that all the information that you send to channels need to be as accurate and as consistent as you can, so that you can make those decisions. But also you need to have a view on that long term, and especially when you're operating on, in your case, you guys make probably the great majority of your profit on that long tail, right? Like it's because given there are small margins, you want to make sure that you're nurturing that client, that the lifetime value actually increases. But that's a design decision. It's something that you actually need to be mindful of and almost design towards, right? And it's a continuum. It's not a one and
yeah, because if you're constantly having to pay the same customer for acquisition, you're just wasting money. You've already got them once. You've got their attention. They've had an experience. So, retargeting is different, but there is an argument to say if you've got that customer, just nurture it in a different way. Exclude them from additional acquisition marketing. Make sure that you're not just randomly spending on unnecessary clicks of people that were going to purchase from you anyway. And that's been the focus of ours. Is if you know them and you know enough about them, that communication can be better than just being another Google shopping ad. You could have upsold them with information that on the products that they do like. And then one thing we're trying to build up, but obviously we've got over 2,000 brands, I think, at this point, nearly 2,000 brands, and 500 different categories of products, right? So now 8,000 plus 8,000 products. So the amount of sub journeys that is in there is obviously overwhelming. But what we want to start building is better post-purchase flows. So if you buy something within a specific category, we're there, educating the customer if they don't know about what they purchased. But secondly, showing them the range of products that we have. So you mentioned that when we talked about like the Johnny Walker billboard and the products that are available everywhere else. Well, the thing that we have as a USP is we have products that aren't available everywhere else. We've got the rare stuff, we've got the MPD, we've got all the stuff that is not readily accessible. But the problem with those products is that people don't know they exist. So we need to educate the people if they come in from Johnny Walker Black Label or Jack Daniel's No. 7 about the Master Distiller series and the McLaren bottles and things that are not in grocery or not in their local off license, and tell them why they should be trying them. They're not necessarily more expensive. They're just not. They don't produce as many of them. And that's been something we've been trying to work with. Like we're working with a really cool business at the moment. It's an Irish distillery. The guy that's the master distiller was ex-Bushmill, so true Irish whiskey, building something new, something great, something new in Ireland. But that's not something that people know about. So how do we take Irish whiskey customers that have bought the stuff that they already know, your Redbreast, your Bushmills, your Jamesons, etc., and educate them and push them into these other brands that they haven't heard about, which is incredibly good liquid. And people are saying this is £160 worth of whiskey for 35 quid. So you need to try it, but you wouldn't know to try that without our business talking about those brands, talking about MPD and guiding people down that route. And that's true with every category in wines, beers, spirit, gin, vodka, everything. So. And there's so many, and as we talked about earlier, there's so many great stories that will resonate with customers that then they build an affinity to that brand by hearing that story. I always use an example. There's a Islay whiskey distillery called Ardbeg, and Ardbeg is on the same road as Lefroy. And basically, there's this little dog, that we used to go into work every day with the guy from Lafroig, and the dog would run off and sit in Ardbegg's distillery every day. And the guy from Ardbeg would ring up Lafroig and say, "Oh mate, your dog's here," and he'd come up and get him. And then one day the guy was like, "Do you know what? Just keep him." And then the dog just lived in the distillery for the rest of his life. And then when he died, Ardbeg made a commemorative tin edition bottle for the dog called Shorty. It's like Shorty's tin, and it comes in a little bow. And if you Google it, it's a really cute little Scotty dog. But everyone that I tell that story to, because I love that story, and I don't particularly like Ardbeg, but I want that tin, and I want to have that relationship with Ardbeg because I love, like dogs and pets and stuff. And that's one story in one of the 2,000 brands that we've got, and each one of those stories that have lasted the test of time is because they have a story behind them. And people can build an affinity to those things. And yes, it's a bit of marketing, of course it is. But that resonance with those customers, if it's communicated in the correct way, is going to build.
I mean, everything is marketing at the end of the day. It doesn't matter what we do, right? I mean, but it's about if you're going to do it, might as well do it well. And I think this is something that like the passion that we can put into stuff. Wes, has a kid. Actually, his name is Kitchener, and Wes became his football coach, and so he likes to take him on the weekends, to kind of like to try it out and to do trial runs in the park and stuff like that. There was one day they were playing, and Kit was like just half-assing it, right? He has a lot of skills, and he was half-assing it, and Wes got a bit mad and said, like, if you're gonna be here on a Sunday morning and we're gonna be doing this, if you don't feel like putting 100% of your effort in it, don't do it, right? Don't have us anything that you're gonna do. And I feel like this goes back to all of us, like as a reminder. When he was telling me that story, like it really kind of like down on me because like at the end of the day, we're spending this time, we're investing this time. Might as well make the most out of it, right? I mean, if you're building a business, right, and you're making a choice to do that, and building a business is very difficult, right? I mean, I don't think anybody, even fathoms the idea of how difficult it is to build a business and to make that choice, right? And to put on all that responsibility, on the back of it, whether, you're the owner or you're a senior management or whether it's difficult, right? So might as well make the most out of that choice that you've made. And I think in your case, like the fact that you've gone into that length and to building that stories into your products, it's marketing, but ultimately it's also part of the moat that you guys built, but it's part of the passion of what makes you different and what makes you do what you do and what makes you, want to tell those stories. It's like going to a fine dining restaurant and, hearing all those stories, paying for the wine pairing and hearing all those stories that sits behind every bottle and why they chose that bottle and why they chose, what they're serving, to you. And how do you elevate that, to an online experience where you don't have something like that and can't create that relationship. And we're getting to a point now where we have the tools out there, right? I mean, and it's about the touch points. And it's about really making something out of the information available to you to elevate that experience with the customer.
Yeah, as I said, I get to hear these stories all the time, but it's just so frustrating that the customer doesn't. And that's been one of the goals, is to be able to share those stories more often and celebrate the people behind the brands a lot of cases. And we're just going through a process of rebranding our blog on site. We've got some really incredible content on there, but we're going through and we're recategorizing some of the profile pieces that we've got to really, like, we're calling it the Legends series and talking about like Leslie Gracie, who's the female founder of Hendrix, and everybody knows Hendrix, but no one knows Leslie, right? And there's three champagne houses that were founded by women. Veuve Clicquot means Widow Clicquot, for example. It's one of the most famous champagnes in the world, but no one knows the origin story and the impact that woman had on what champagne is now. And that's that resonance, and that's that bit of history and bit of relationship to our industry in booze that just isn't showcased. And that's why I'm the same in e-commerce, right? I spend a lot of time doing talks and podcasts and stuff because I want to share the knowledge that I've earned, like we've earned over time, for somebody else to go and do something great with it. But the same is true with the stories with the brands. Oh,
that is great. Tim, last few bits. like, and you were, and I think, this is a great segue, right? If you were to be able to talk to you, right, when you were that designer about to make that decision about becoming head of e-com and taking into this new journey, what would you say it would be like the number one advice, or top three advice that you would give to yourself back in that journey, 7 years ago?
I think I did it, but it's shut up and listen. I think it's just go, like, talk to people, network, go and find out why people make the decisions that they do, their successes. Like, there's so many, especially in e-commerce, there's so many events, there's so many people to talk to, there's so many brands that have made the same mistakes or different mistakes than you have. I've been lucky enough to go to amazing dinners with amazing founders of different businesses, and that's where I get most of my insight from. The things we've tested, the ideas that we get, all come from those little conversations you probably otherwise wouldn't have bothered to have. And it's just, I don't want to say yes to things, because I'm actively trying to say no to more stuff, but I think saying yes and being present and going and listening to people's stories and how they operate, what they're doing, what their team's focused on, it's just, we're so lucky for especially not in the network that we have within this space, to just talk and learn. So yeah, shut up and listen.
That's a good one. Number two, is there anything else that you will say apart from that?
Don't be afraid to be wrong. Like,
that's a great one. Yeah, everybody wants to be right the first time.
Being wrong is actually one of the strongest things you could possibly do, because you're always learning if you're wrong. If you get something right too often, you can't actually test against it. We made countless mistakes as we've grown, but it's how you work. Like, the whole point of a hypothesis is to get it wrong, right? It's like, you have an idea, and the example of what we're doing with the checkout thing is exactly the same. That we had this opinion that if you bought whiskey, you're a whiskey customer. But it's not true. 50% of the people that buy whiskey buy from somebody else, right? How they purchase, why they purchase, their repeat purchase rate, their customer lifetime is completely different to what we assumed it was. That was a mistake. But what did we do? We went, okay, we don't know something about our customer. How do we go and find out this information about the customer? We built it, and now we're able to reap the benefits of being wrong, adapting, and finding a new way of doing it. So don't be afraid to be wrong, and actually be proud in being wrong, because you're only going to be moving forward.
No, that is great. Tim, thank you for your generosity, for sitting here today to share that journey, but also to share that knowledge, and that experience, and also the passion about what you do, and marketplaces, they're difficult to differentiate, and creating that moat around actually caring for what you do, for the product that you're selling, for putting the effort, going that extra mile. I think it's something that we all can learn from, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's in building those relationships, nurturing that that long-term relationship with a customer, making sure that like yesterday Facebook was saying, I was sitting yesterday at an executive lunch with with Facebook, and they were saying that there is more or less 35% of the media spend is a spend on customers that would have bought anyway.
Yeah.
The problem is you don't know which 35%. But like, to your point, right? It's about, then you actually need to nurture and figure it out, but also do the right exclusions and everything in the way that you approach things. It's about being mindful and being intentional about the actions that you make, rather than just looking for silver bullets and then looking to see what sticks.
And I think with Klaviyo's launch of B2C CRM is actually going to be super interesting to see how brands finally start leveraging. Like, obviously you work in an agency, you work B2B, you know what having a CRM is like, you know where they are in their funnel, you know what you need to know about them, you've got the notes on what you've learned about the relationship. We're just not doing that within e-commerce. We're not holding that information appropriately against that user to go. One thing we started doing years ago was we started asking before Father's Day and Mother's Day if it was a short period of time, because you don't want to be constantly marketed if you've lost a family member during those quite hard periods of time. And we always get people reaching out and say, thank you so much for asking that question, right? And it's not something you really want to hold in a CRM, is, are their parents alive? But it is important in terms of how you communicate with them, where you can build a poor relationship by not knowing something about someone. You can reject a business or reject marketing because it doesn't resonate with you or it hurts you. And that's a prime example. And I think I'm really excited to see what brands will do when storing information against the customers, not from a marketing perspective, but from a relationship perspective. Go and nurture the customers that you've got, learn about them, work out why they're their customer. I think like skincare is going to be amazing, right? So I say that my example of gift, host and self is just as important in skincare, because if you're buying a product that's going to be great for acne, or they bought it for acne and they haven't, but the product they bought isn't for acne or is actually going to make it worse, that question saying what was the reason that you purchased, was it for this skin issue, this, you can proactively in a customer service go, we know that you bought this product, but we actually don't recommend it for the thing that you're trying to cure. We recommend this. That's like proactive, thoughtful relationship with that customer, and you can show them the things that they actually need, and then you can even put into their CRM about their ailment and say this customer has acne, so the communications they're going to want to see doesn't need to be about hair loss or skin clarity or something. Do you know what I mean? I'm no idea about skincare, but the things that you can know about and hold against that customer is so important and so interesting. So yeah, really excited to see what people do with that information, and how they start building out those customer relationships in the future.
Yeah, and one, an interesting point is there are going to be, people think, oh, it's like at my scale I'm not going to be able to do it. I don't think
we're in e-commerce. That's the joy of e-commerce, that you can do. It's all about process and efficiencies. I'm an efficiencies person, right? It's enabling getting the data is the tough bit, but once it's there, it's automatic. I've got segments that are being built as we speak based on customer behavior on site. I just need to go and do that legwork once. I mean, Shopify Flow is prime example, and same with Klaviyo flows. Just working out what your trigger is and enabling it to just setting it live. It can do so much with it.
Yeah.
And then the smaller you are, the more that you can nurture the customer, because you haven't got to deal with such a large number of customers. Really, if you're in a smaller position, your relationship to the customer should be better, not worse.
No, it does. It does. Lots of food for thought for the brands out there. Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day is don't have asset, and really put the effort in. That's I think that, profitability is about that. It's about not harassing stuff. It's about knowing your stuff and being intentional about what you do.
Yes, for sure.
Tim, have a great day. I appreciate your time here.
Very much.
And thanks everybody for joining us and being here today. Another, banger of an episode with us. So yeah, thanks everybody. Have a good one. Talk to you next week. Bye.